This one is by Joe.
Hi, Say. Sorry I couldn't be there. Hello, everybody. This is Joe. Hold your applause. Okay, here's the piece that I wrote for the painting. It's called Tuning Fork Time Signature 2, which, of course, if you could see the painting, would make total sense. Just kidding. Okay. To be the visited party or to visit. The neighborhood cat, a big orange Tom, slept in our room that night. I was opening my drawer very early and saw him slide out the window into the Bay Area fog. Jory Graham's self-portraiture is always pointed outwards, never with the eye. Self-portrait as hurry and delay, Penelope at her loom. Self-portrait as the gesture between them, Adam and Eve. Self-portrait as Apollo and Daphne. And always in two, even when only Penelope is the subject. It is two phenomena and the space between them. The done and the undone rush into each other's arms. The threads running forwards, yet backwards, over her stilled fingers. Part 2. My mother and I took the ferry to Governor's Island in 2016 to see a show by Michael Richards, the sculptor and painter. He often molded versions of his own body. For example, his most well-known work, Tar Baby versus Saint Sebastian, has him cast in bronze as a Tuskegee airman, wearing a fighter pilot's helmet and being run through by small model jets the way Saint Sebastian was pierced by spears. For Richards, everything that moves also moves in its opposite direction. In one of his pieces, model airplanes hang careening straight down to the ground, but there to receive them, painted with a bullseye, is a mirror setting them back skywards. And when we hear Tuskegee Airmen and remember the thrill of that story, whose two disproved villains were American racism and German Nazism, we have to remember why else Tuskegee was famous during and after World War II. Strangely, Lawrence Fishburne stars both in the Tuskegee Airmen in 1995 and also a movie about the Tuskegee syphilis studies called Miss Evers' Boys in 1997. At the end of the first, now a hero, he opens a newspaper to read about the terrible fate of the character he would play 2 years later. Jorge Daniel Veneciano writes about Michael Richards that each of his works engages the notion of flight in at least two important senses, as a form of flight away from what is repressive and as a form of flight toward what is redeeming. Every article on Michael Richards that was written after he died mentions the final unsettling fact of his life, that after developing a body of work that centered on flying, simultaneously positing an escape to freedom via flight, and questioning the possibility of such an escape, always returning to the Tuskegee Airmen and the figure of the airplane, he died on September 11th at work in his studio in the North Tower, having slept there on the night of September 10th. On our way to the ferry, my mother and I walked downtown through that neighborhood, now of course the one building where there had been two. Samuel Delaney describes them in his essay Ash Wednesday as the great tuning fork in the sky. Part 3. Every conversation is in two, even if one party does not respond. Quote, actually I excoriated him recently on my blog, Joel said, and I thought, who would read that? And he took a spoonful of his mushroom soup. He said, this neighborhood is impossible at this time of day. And then, did you ever have a real father figure? On the phone with my mother again. Well, that wasn't backstabbing, it was treachery. And then, but obviously you can't trust anyone in Vienna. Hamlet to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Oh God, I could be blinded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space were it not that I have bad dreams. Part 4. In order to coat the string thoroughly, it must be passed back and forth, sometimes more than once. Cut a hole in the bottom of the tube and thread the string from there up through its regular opening. The paint may need to be spread by hand as well, and the tube will be covered in paint as it changes hands over the canvas. But that, though it too is the result of the instructions, is not the piece. When the string is saturated with paint, hold it taut over the canvas, and one assistant must pull it up and let it snap back down. And this must be repeated in parallel every 3/8 inches. Why did I write that way? This must be repeated in parallel every 3/8 of an inch until there is no room left. Each finished painting is an even row of lines, but a viewer can see where a paint-covered gloved hand pinched and pulled the string. There is a collection along each vertical edge, right and left, of thumbprints. S and I have different ways of holding down the string, so the painting is always asymmetrical. We wonder if we should switch sides. Tension makes it happen. Communication is gestural. Transfer the tube. 3 hands, 2 hold tight, and 1 snaps.